Built in the 1100s, Balvenie Castle has been home to three of Scotland's mighty dynasties. It isn't the most famous of Scotland's castles. It has never seen a major siege, held a famous prisoner, or witnessed a notorious murder. But it has definitely played an important part in the course of Scotland's history.
Hello, I'm Ellie.
And I'm Martin.
And today we have come to Dufton to explore Balvenie Castle.
Let's go find out.
The original castle was home to the Comyn family and had a quadrangular courtyard enclosed by a high curtain wall. This was surrounded with a wall walk, a berm, and further protected by a defensive ditch. The enclosure probably had towers on at least three of its corners. Much of the early castle's wall still survives, with the original stonework intact. The well is probably original too. Its unusual berm is around 12 metres wide and would have surrounded the whole castle. The defensive ditch that surrounded the berm had a stone wall on both sides, was again about 12 metres wide and would probably have been filled with water. The original entrance was presumably heavily fortified and may well have been accessed via a drawbridge. The Comyns were the mighty and powerful Earls of Buchan, who ruled this area of northeast Scotland. They played a major role in the wars of Scottish independence, however they lost power when Robert the Bruce seized the throne in 1306. In the early 1400s, the castle was home to the Black Douglases, the second dynasty to live here, and there are some areas of the castle from this time that still survive. The West Range had vaulted cellars. An L-shaped stone stair led to a hall and a private inner chamber with a privy. The South Range housed the kitchen and the brewhouse. The upper floor of the East Range probably housed the Douglases' Great Hall, where they would have held court. It would have had a magnificent stone-vaulted ceiling. A great fireplace occupied much of the north wall, and there was a privy. There is a blocked-up doorway which hints at further accommodation on a second floor. On the ground floor is another grand stone-vaulted room, which is believed to have been a bakehouse. The Douglases were granted lordship, but not the earldom, by Bruce. The Douglases became as mighty as the Comyns and had a power base in southern Scotland. But James II distrusted them and eventually suppressed their dynasty in 1455. The east wall was remodelled in the mid-1500s by the Stuarts, the third and final family to call Balvenie home. The Stuarts were the Earls of Atholl, and this side of the castle became known as the Atholl Lodging. It comprises much of the original east enclosure wall, with a new entrance gateway, and the ditch along the east and north sides was filled in to provide a more sophisticated lodging. The West Range was no longer a residence, and stables were created in its northern half. When you look at the castle's entrance facade, it's easy to see a distinct vertical break in the masonry. Everything to the right of that break was built between 1547 and 1557. The freestone dressings and elaborate heraldic panels and mouldings contrast strongly with the castle's earlier, more brutal look, transforming it from a grim fortress into a stately residence. The large round tower and its array of wide gun holes were not for defence, but rather a nod to its past. The lodging was 3 stories high, with an attic above. The windows are corbelled, have bow-shaped sills and canopied lintels. They were glazed with leaded lights and protected with timber shutters. James II granted Balvenie to his half-brother John Stuart, the Earl of Atholl. Their annual rent was the princely sum of a single red rose. Over the next 250 years, the Stuarts transformed this former medieval stronghold into an attractive Renaissance residence. The Atholl Lodging was built in the mid-1500s, during the reign of Mary, Queen of Scots. As you walk around, it's easy to imagine the opulent life these dynasties would have enjoyed here. The entrance facade shows heraldic panels, as well as the royal arms of Scotland. These panels have long since lost the brightness and colour that they would have originally displayed, but nonetheless they still convey the importance this castle once had. The present gateway and pend were built in the mid-1500s when the Atholl lodging was added. The doorway is finely moulded and carved. There are stone seats in the pend, and just off to the side is a small vaulted porter's lodge with a fireplace. From the courtyard you can see the remains of the earlier larger arch, which was original to the building. The gateway has another unique feature, a double yett. Instead of the usual single gate, it has two gates, which sat behind two timber doors. From the courtyard you can see two asymmetrical circular towers, either side of the entrance. The larger one is elaborate. Near the top it becomes square with a stepped gable. This tower would have been exclusively for use by the Earl and the Countess. The smaller tower was for guests. The Atholl lodging provided the Earl and Countess with separate apartments, which would have been situated on the two upper floors. Unusually, the ground floor contained 4 individual private chambers, which might have been for senior members of the Earl and Countess's households. Each chamber had a vaulted ceiling, a window, a fireplace, and an ensuite privy. The private apartments on the upper floors would have been decorated with tapestries, carpets, and bedding, although furniture would have been sparse, limited to that which was necessary. The Earl's apartment has a mysterious 4th room, whose function is baffling. Could it possibly be a study, or perhaps there's another theory? Its position and projecting corbels suggest that the Stuarts might have intended to incorporate a gallery here. It is unusual that there isn't a gallery at this castle. Balvenie's position may seem unusual, given that it is an apparent distant outpost, but this area was very important. Its position is strategic. It sits at the head of Glen Rhinnis and Glen Fiddich, lands that were once crucial to this part of Morayshire, which was formerly known as Mortlach. It's likely that the original castle, built in the 1100s, was probably built by the Stuarts, having been granted the lordship by King William I. When the Comyns took over the lordship in 1264, they had become a powerful family. Between them, differing family members held the lordships of Balvenie, Buchan and Badenoch. Thus their influence stretched from the east coast to the west coast. The Comyns were the most powerful dynasty in Scotland when the bloody wars of independence with England erupted in 1296. They were genuine claimants to the Scottish throne, but the family was inconsistent with their allegiance, supporting at different times Edward I of England, King John Balliol of Scotland, and Robert the Bruce. But when Bruce murdered John Comyn in 1306, the family finally settled their allegiance in favour of King Edward I. However, Bruce seized the Scottish throne, and one by one, castles fell to him. The Comyns' rule ended on the 22nd of May, 1308, when Bruce and Comyn met in battle at Inverurie in nearby Aberdeenshire. The Douglases were granted lordship of Balvenie in 1408. They were a lowland dynasty with major seats across southern Scotland from Glasgow to the borders. Balvenie, however small, was not insignificant, insomuch that the lordship came with significant economic benefits. But they became entangled in dangerous power struggles. In 1440, William, the 6th Earl of Douglas, was murdered in Edinburgh Castle during James II's infamous Black Dinner, making his corpulent uncle, James the Gross, the most powerful magnate in Scotland. When he died in 1443, the power struggle between the Douglases and the Stuarts erupted into open conflict. Eventually, James II's army routed the Douglases at the Battle of Arkinholm in May 1455. The Douglases fled to England, and their titles and estates were forfeited to the Crown. In 1460, James II granted Balvenie to John Stuart. His wife Margaret had previously been married to both the 8th and 9th Earls of Douglas, and had probably inherited the lands of Balvenie before the Douglases' downfall in 1455. There was a condition to the grant. The Earl and Countess were obliged to render 1 red rose each year at the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist by way of rent. 100 years later, in 1547, Elizabeth Gordon was granted the castle by her husband, the 4th Earl of Atholl. It's thought that it was Countess Elizabeth who invested in the sumptuous Athol lodging. Her father was George Gordon, the 4th Earl of Huntly, and there are striking similarities between the new lodging and her father's palace at nearby Huntly Castle. The 4th Earl was also a member of Mary Queen of Scots' First Council. Mary spent 2 nights at Balvenie in September 1562 during her campaign against Athol's father-in-law Huntly. Athol was with her at the Battle of Corrickey when Huntly was defeated, but he was against her when she surrendered at Carberry Hill on the 15th of June 1567. Athol died suddenly, suspected poisoned, during a dinner at Stirling Castle in 1579. The Stuarts of Athol remained at Balvenie until the early 1600s. From 1610 onwards, the castle changed hands numerous times. It also figured in the troubled history of the region. In 1644, Charles I rested his men here, safe from the Duke of Argyll's cavalry. In 1649, Charles II's royalists were routed by General Leslie's Covenanters at Balvenie, killing the then laird Walter Innes. During the joint reign of William and Mary in 1689, Balvenie was garrisoned for the sovereigns, but troops fled after Viscount Dundee's victory at the Battle of Killiecrankie, replaced by victorious Jacobites before the risings collapsed. In 1715, both the Jacobites and the government sought allegiance from the castle's laird, William Duff, who pledged to defend the castle against the rebels. The castle was not attacked, and government troops were welcomed, using the castle as a base during the final weeks of the Jacobite risings. The castle was taken into state care in 1929. Balvenie remains in private ownership. The current Baron of Balvenie lives in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States of America. Although Balvenie never saw a major battle, it was in an important strategic position and played an important part in Scotland's history. It was home to 3 of Scotland's mighty dynasties, each of them powerful in their time, and each leaving a little piece of this castle as a stone legacy for us to marvel at.
Well, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed your tour of Balvenie Castle. What a very interesting place.
It is.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Very small, not very much to it, but
Well
brilliant.
worth a visit.
Well worth a visit if you're in the area.
Mm.
Thanks for watching. Take care now.
Cheers now.
See you next time.
Bye.